Hello, and welcome to our DRI Summit Day 1 keynote. I'm Jeff Holland, DRI's Communications and Social Media Manager, here to welcome Michael Berkowitz, founding principal of Resilience Cities Catalyst, who's drawing on his experiences from around the world to address reducing risk and increasing resilience in a post-COVID world. Resilience Cities Catalyst is a global nonprofit helping cities and their partners tackle their toughest challenges. Previously, Berkowitz joined the Rockefeller Foundation in August 2013 to shape and oversee the creation of 100 Resilient Cities. He served as the 100RC president from 2013 to 2019. From 2005 to 2013, he worked at Deutsche Bank, most recently as the global head of operational risk management. In that capacity, he oversaw the firm's OR capital planning efforts and served as a primary regulatory contact and connected the myriad operational risk management efforts group-wide. This was one of multiple positions Berkowitz held at DB, as well as Chief Operating Officer of Corporate Security, Business Continuity, and Operational Risk Management. Michael, thanks for being here with us today.
Hello. My name is Michael Berkowitz. I'm the founding principal of Resilience Cities Catalyst, a global nonprofit dedicated to helping cities change the way they plan and act. I'm so excited to be here talking with you today. As you may know, I ran business continuity and crisis management at Deutsche Bank for many years, and I'm a CDCP holder myself. So I'm deeply appreciative of all of the incredible work that many of you have been doing over these past 12 months. And I'm a firm believer that we need all three sectors, government, private sector, and civil society, to work together to build the kind of resilience that we'll surely need over the years ahead. And to do that, I'm going to argue that we need a new approach, one that's less siloed and more integrated, one that's more inclusive, and an approach that, while we recognize and use the risk management principles that we're all familiar with, that we need to go further than that the past will not predict the future, that the 100-year floodplain or the historic wildfire risk profile or the global supply chain risk that we've all wrestled with in terms of interconnected cities, that landscape is changing so quickly that we need a new approach to build a kind of resilience that allows us to prepare for whatever comes next. And I'm going to talk about what that approach looks like in terms of municipal work, in terms of government work, about how the world's most innovative cities are preparing themselves for this uncertain future. But I think that the lessons learned by cities are equally applicable to the private sector, and I hope you'll find that interesting. So the last 12 months has been unprecedented. I'm not the first person to say that. But the way I look at it, it's been this story of compounding shocks and stresses. We've had the pandemic, we've had climate shocks unlike any we've seen. And here you see flooding in Asia, as well as the recent Texas freeze and water crisis. And of course, in the US, we've had upheavals over structural racism and social inequities. But where resilience thinking comes down here is that it looks at these various incidents as interconnected, that the same communities most impacted by inequity are the ones that are at risk to climate shocks, are the same ones that performed the worst during the COVID pandemic in terms of disease transmission and mortality. And while that can seem overwhelming with risk factor layering in over risk factor, it also gives us an opportunity to begin to address multiple threats with single interventions. And that's the story I want to tell you today. Before I do that, I just want to say a word about cities, because we've heard the obituary of cities written more than once over the last 12 months. The theory goes that as people are more aware and conscious of disease transmission. And as they have more options to work outside of central business districts, they're going to migrate to places of less density. And while I think we might see a little bit of that in the short term, and we probably have seen some of that in the short term, over the long term, cities are still going to be the drivers of our economy. They're still going to be the place where the most people live. In fact, 55% of the world's population lives there now, and by the middle of this century, 70% of the world's population is still predicted to live in cities. And they're going to require an awful lot of investment, both to deal with the climate threat as well as growing population. And as such, they're going to be centers of opportunity. And so we really need to figure out how to make our cities less fragile and more resilient for the years ahead. And that's the story we're going to talk about now. The way we've been thinking about that is this practice called urban resilience. Simply put, urban resilience is about a city's ability to survive and thrive in the face of disaster. The textbook definition that we use is the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within a city to survive, adapt, and grow no matter what kind of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. And the way cities do this is they build a kind of capacity. They build a capacity of social cohesion where neighbors check on neighbors. They build diverse middle-class economies. They underpin that with strong multi-use green infrastructure, and they set up governance systems with multiple stakeholders at the table. All of those capacities help cities survive, adapt, and grow no matter what the threats are. And that's what we call resilience. And we've been talking now also about this new concept called the Resilience Dividend. It tries to speak to, in the old days, we used to have single purposes for each intervention. So you would build a flood or seawall to keep the water back, or you would install a program to reduce poverty, or you might build a highway to promote transportation. And what Resilience Dividend tries to think about is how each intervention is an opportunity for multiple capacity building along multiple scales. And that's how the world's most innovative and resilient cities are thinking about their risks and opportunities, and what I want to talk to you about today. First example of the Resilience Dividend comes from Paris. Paris applied to the 100 Resilient Cities program that I was the president of, and really wanted to focus around climate shocks. The mayor of Paris, Mayor Anne Hidalgo, who was actually just reelected last year, wanted to talk about air pollution, flooding, and the urban heat island. But then, of course, 2015 happened, and there were 2 terrorist attacks and a refugee crisis. And so what resilience thinking tries to challenge us is, how do we think about all those things together? What we helped Paris do is think about their interior school courtyards. Paris has some of the lowest amount of public green space of any world capital, but they do own 561 schools, each of which has an interior courtyard where the children play. And those courtyards are almost all concrete. Collectively, individually, those courtyards are small, but collectively, those courtyards comprise over 700 acres of space in Paris city itself. And so what we did is we helped Paris reimagine what they could use those courtyards for. And the Oasis Schoolyard program was born. And what you see here is a rendering from a consultation with school children, with some of the neighborhoods, with school construction professionals, with climate change activists, to understand how they might better use the schoolyards. Here's an example of what they did. first of all, they put green features like bushes, grass, and trees. And they built a lot of light-colored substrate, light-colored, heat-reflecting substrate. The primary purpose of this intervention is to break the urban heat island. Then they added rainwater capture and storage and permeable surfaces to reduce the impact of flooding. And finally, they opened these interior courtyards to the communities and the neighborhoods on the weekends so that they could help the most vulnerable neighborhoods have a place to go, to mingle, to meet, to understand what it means to be French, Parisian, and European. And here you see the resilience dividend. On the bottom left is the primary purpose of this intervention. It's to break the urban heat island. But you also get reduced flood risk, you get increased social cohesion, and increased green space. All of these capacities are going to help Paris become more resilient for whatever the next crisis is. And you know, this is not an insignificant thing, given that we're going through a crisis now, the COVID pandemic, that impacts people with poor respiratory health. This is an incredible gift to them and somewhere that they can go meet, mingle, and be outside in a safe environment. The next example comes from the Indian city of Mumbai. It's a neighborhood called Matunga. It's kind of in the center, the geographic center of Mumbai. For those of you in the Financial Services Center, it's just north of Lower Parel and a little bit south of Sakinaka, two places where you may have visited. It's an area that's rich with heritage and culture. And this project actually came from a local citizens group called One Matunga, who wanted to improve the derelict spaces underneath the vehicle flyovers. Now, Mumbai, like many rapidly growing Asian cities, suffers from poor use of space and crumbling derelict infrastructure, as well as urban flooding. And so what this did was repave and green the spaces underneath this infrastructure so that people could both recreate and transport themselves. And it provided additional vegetation and beautification to the neighborhood. Here you see what the resilience dividends of a single intervention are. You get reduced pollution and reduced flooding, and you get increased economic growth because the merchants benefit from all the pedestrian traffic, and of course increased road safety because people are transporting themselves in a place that's physically separated from the cars. And this project was so popular that it influenced the city government, the Bombay Municipal Corporation, to design and build 29 more gardens under their bridges and flyovers. So here we started very small with one piece of infrastructure, but it was so popular, it was able to be replicated all over the city. The two examples I just gave are infrastructure examples. Let me give you one about policy, and that's around economic conversion in New Orleans, Louisiana. As you probably know, New Orleans is both overexposed to the petrochemical industry in terms of jobs, as it is overexposed to climate change in terms of rising sea levels and hurricanes and coastal storms. And so New Orleans wanted to reduce its exposure to the petrochemical industry. And its business group, GNO Inc., did a study that actually showed that petrochemical industry jobs were very similar to water management jobs. The water management being the practice of helping control and manage flooding, both on a large scale and a small scale. There are plumbing jobs, there are skilled trade jobs, and it allowed New Orleans to take something that is viewed as a weakness. It's catastrophic flooding like in Katrina, and it's chronic flooding on a day-to-day basis, and begin to build a core competency and turn that into a strength. What New Orleans did was it seeded a number of academic programs at the big prestigious universities like Tulane, as well as did job training programs at its community colleges like Delgado Community College, for those of you who know New Orleans. And it stood up the Water Institute as a center of water-specific research and practice. And it built in job training and development money to all of its large infrastructure projects like the Gentilly Water District that you see here. And so at once, one initiative is beginning to address a number of different threats and produce a number of different disciplines to make New Orleans more resilient. It reduces flooding. That's the day-to-day benefit. It increases green space so people have places to recreate and to ride bikes and to get outside in the city. But most importantly, over the long term, it's going to increase economic diversity and produce better jobs that are not dependent on the dying industry of petrochemical, but rather in a forward-looking, fast-growing discipline of water management. And ultimately, New Orleans hopes to export these water management jobs, not just in the region, but throughout the world in the same way the Dutch do. And you can see how a single intervention helped address a number of different threats that New Orleans had. So I'm going to leave that there. I hope that I left you with the fact that all of our challenges are integrated in many different ways. And 2020 really demonstrated that pretty clearly. And while that is in some ways daunting, it also is an opportunity because it allows us to address multiple challenges with single interventions through what we call the resilience dividend. And that by private sector, government, and civil society working together, we can develop resilience approach and make ourselves stronger, less fragile, and ultimately more resilient for the years to come. Thank you very much.